Your Honor, would you like the witness to take the stand now before the jury comes in?
I'm afraid he's going to get caught in the middle, so.
Okay, we will wait. No problem.
Please rise.
Don't worry. Yes, Your Honor. Defendant Perez will call Alexander Thixton. Thank you so much.
Swear affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth on the penalty of law? I do. Thank you. May be seated. Can I ask that you state your name for the record and also spell your first and last name?
Certainly. Alexander Thixton, spelled A-L-E-X-E-A-N-D-E-R-T-H-I-C-K-S-T-U-N.
Thank you. May be seated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thixton.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by talking to you briefly about who you are and some of your background. Can you tell me how are you currently employed?
I work for a company called Science Systems and Applications Incorporated, SSAI for short, and they're a NASA support contractor.
Okay. And is it okay if I just call them Science Systems? Because I didn't.
That's fine.
Okay.
Or SSAI.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what do you do for that company, sir?
So we're working on a series of climate satellites for the NASA Earth observing mission.
Okay. And how long have you worked for that company?
I just started there recently, about 2 months ago.
And how were you employed in March of 2014?
I was in the Air Force.
And what rank were you within the Air Force?
At that time, I was a captain.
Okay. And when did you join the United States Air Force?
May of 2005.
And prior to joining the United States Air Force, had you pursued any post-secondary education?
Yes.
Please explain what post-secondary education you pursued.
Before I joined the Air Force, I have a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering.
And after completing that bachelor's degree, is that when you joined the Air Force?
Yes.
And are you currently in the Air Force, sir?
Not anymore.
Okay. And how are you discharged?
Honorably.
Now, where were you stationed in March of 2014?
I was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base.
Okay. And when were you first stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base?
In February 1st of 2014.
Okay. And were you living in Albuquerque at the time you were first stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you move to Albuquerque?
We moved shortly before February, I think, in the late January time frame.
So you moved to Albuquerque in late January of 2014.
Correct.
Okay. And what part of the city did you move to when you came to Albuquerque?
It's east of Tramway, north of Copper, near the foothills. So
Okay.
it would be northeast Albuquerque.
Okay. And what was your address, sir?
812 Piedra Vista Road, northeast.
Okay, and you mentioned that your house was near the foothills, correct?
Yes.
How close to the foothills was your house?
The backyard opened up right to the foothills.
Okay, and when you say the backyard opened up to the foothill, were you able to access the foothills from your backyard?
Yes, there was a gate southeast of the property that you could open and directly access the open space area there.
And when you were living at 1812 Piedra Vista, did you ever actually go explore the foothill area behind your house?
Yes.
And how often would you explore that area?
About once or twice a week, or I'm sorry, once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on how weather was.
Okay. And what type of activities were you hiking or biking back there?
It would be hiking and walking my dogs back there.
Okay. Now, after you moved to your house at 1812 Piedra Vista in February of 2000 or January of 2014, did you experience any type of problem or disturbances in the foothills behind your house?
Yes.
And if you would please explain what disturbances you experienced there behind your house.
So there was an instance where it was 11:30 at night. I woke up to the dogs barking. They were outside barking, so I opened the patio door in my bedroom and told them to hush, and they didn't, which was actually kind of odd. So I went downstairs to get the dogs in the backyard. While I was out there, I heard yelling coming from the mountains.
Okay, let me stop you there. When you mentioned it was 11:30 at night, but I don't believe I heard a date. Do you know approximately when this occurred?
It'd be February 25th.
So shortly after you moved into your house, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you heard some yelling coming from the foothills?
Excuse me,
Yes.
Your Honor, objection meeting. Is my understanding directing buildings to a certain point, but...
Yes, Your Honor. He mentioned that he heard yelling, and I was just confirming that statement. Can you please describe the yelling that you heard coming from the foothills?
There was one individual who I would know now to be Mr. Boyd, and another individual there who I think was in his late teens. And Mr. Boyd was yelling at the other individual.
And how were you able to determine that Mr. Boyd was yelling at the other individual?
He directed his conversation toward him. He started out by saying his life was ruined. He made claims about how he was millions of dollars in debt, and the other boy would sometimes talk back, but he talked in a voice where I couldn't understand what he was saying. Later, Mr. Boyd got a little more agitated and threatened him.
Okay, and how did Mr. Boyd threaten that other individual?
He said,
Your Honor, 401, 402, 403.
I'm happy to argue it if you'd like us to approach it. Your Honor? Okay. And I believe when we left off, you were explaining the threats that you heard Mr. Boyd making to this person that you've described as being in their late teens. What threats was Mr. Boyd making to that individual?
I just remember that he threatened to harm him, and it was actually when I decided that I should call 911.
Okay, and what specifically did he say that led you to believe that Mr. Boyd had threatened to harm that other individual?
I don't recall specifically what he said that night. Unfortunately, it was 2.5 years ago. I remember he didn't threaten to kill him, but I remember he threatened to harm him, saying probably something along the lines that he was like,
Excuse me, Your Honor, he said he has a phone number.
Now, Mr. Thixton, after you heard Mr. Boyd making those threats to harm that teenager up there,
Excuse me, Your Honor, it's misleading. He said he had one thing, and this went on for what? So, I back up for 03.
I'll rephrase, Your Honor. After you heard Mr. Boyd make a threat to harm a teenager behind your house, what did you do?
I called the police.
And why did you call the police?
I was concerned for safety
Okay, and why were you concerned for safety?
because he had aggressive demeanor and he was a few hundred yards away from my house.
Okay, and you mentioned that he was a few hundred yards away from your house. Where specifically was Mr. Boyd located in relation to your house?
There's a mound behind my house. It's called U Mound. And from what I could gather, it was at the base of the mound. That's where they were at.
Okay. And is it fair to say that where they were at that night is the same area where this incident occurred?
Objection on the meeting?
Are you aware of whether or not the police responded to the incident in the foothills on the night of February 25th?
I would learn later that they did respond. Okay. I would learn later that they did respond.
Okay, and how did you know that the police responded to your call?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
I'm asking for his observations or how he learned if he did that night. And I can rephrase the question. Were you contacted by the police that night?
I contacted the police that night. I'm sorry. I contacted 911 that night. The operator asked if I wanted to make contact with the police. At that time, I said no. I told them where to find him in the foothills and how they could get there. What happened was, I learned later that they drove down Piedra.
Excuse me, this is the hearsay part. Objection.
So let me just instruct. You personally observed anything or heard something that's, you may answer, but if you learned it from another source.
Okay.
Did you personally observe the officers respond on the night you called on February 25th of 2014?
No.
Okay. And was that the only time you called the police on Mr. Boyd?
No.
And how many other times did you call the police on Mr. Boyd?
There was one other instance where I had to call the police.
Okay. And do you remember the date on which you called the police on Mr. Boyd again?
That was on March 16th, 2014.
Okay, and we'll move into that incident in a moment. Before March 16th of 2014, were there any other disturbances behind your house related to Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Will you please explain what those disturbances were?
On March 1st, 7 a.m., my wife was taking a shower in the upstairs shower. And there's a window that looks out into the foothills. While she was taking a shower, she saw two individuals. They were getting dressed and they were eating.
Okay, and based on your observations of your wife, how did she react to seeing those two men behind your house while she was showering?
Excuse me, Your Honor, 401.
Now, after your wife observed those two men behind your house, did you call the police once again?
No, at that time.
Okay, and why didn't you call the police that time?
Because when I learned that they were there, they were packing up to leave. When they left, I didn't call the police because I wanted them to be present so the police could confront them and tell them they're not supposed to be there and not to come back.
Okay, and when you say that they were not supposed to be there, what do you mean?
They're not supposed to be camping or living out in the foothills in the open space area.
And how do you know that they aren't supposed to be camping or living in the open space area?
There's signs posted at all of the trail entrances into open space talking about the different rules, and one of those rules is no camping overnight.
And that sign was in place in March of 2014?
Yes.
And where was that sign located?
That specific sign, when you drive down Copper East until it dead ends into Copper Trail, it's right on the entrance of that trail.
Now, you mentioned that the second time you called the police on Mr. Boyd was on March 16th of 2014. Is that correct?
Yes.
And will you please describe what event or series of events led you to call the police on March 16th of 2014?
Certainly. So that day, I decided to hike up U Mound, which was behind my house. When I was at the top of U Mound, I looked down. I could actually see what looked like someone's belongings.
Okay, and how far away from those belongings were you when you saw them?
I was probably about 200 or 300 feet away, and it was at a steep incline. It was, I was at the top of U Mound. You'd be looking down at probably like a 40-degree incline to where his location was, where his belongings were located.
Okay, and from the location of your house at the base of the foothills, were you able to see those belongings?
Yeah. No, from my house, they were concealed by, I described it as like a nest of rocks.
Okay. So you would describe the area where Mr. Boyd's belongings were at as a nest of rocks?
Objection needed, Your Honor.
And why do you describe that area as a nest of rocks?
Because it's concealing.
And why do you believe it's concealing?
Because you almost have to be right up to that level next to it to actually see into that area. The neighbors would not be able to see something behind that, would not be able to see someone behind that unless they were standing up, unless they moved to the right of the rocks, which would be south of the rocks.
And during your time living at 1812 Piedra Vista, did you notice other people in the area behind your residence?
We have people hike back there, bike back there all the time.
And how often specifically do you see people recreating in that area?
Especially on the weekends, very often.
Do you remember what day March 16th, 2014 was?
I think it was a Saturday. Saturday or a Sunday, but I'm leaning towards Saturday.
Okay, was it the weekend?
Yes.
Okay. Now, after you saw Mr. Boyd's belongings when you were at the top of U Mound, did you approach those belongings?
Not at that time.
And why didn't you approach his belongings at that time?
I wanted to grab a few things from the house before I were to approach his belongings.
Okay, and what did you want to grab from your house before you approached his belongings?
I grabbed my 2 dogs, I grabbed a pistol, and I grabbed a camera.
Okay, and why did you want to grab those 3 items before you approached his belongings?
I wanted something for self-defense in case for whatever reason he appeared and I couldn't get out of the area. And direct the camera so I could document what was there, so if needed, I could provide to police.
Okay. And you mentioned self-defense. Why did you think it was a possibility that you were going to have to defend yourself when you were approaching Mr. Boyd's belongings?
It would have been a worst-case scenario because I wanted to ensure that he was not present when I went up there. But if for some reason he was present, the only other time I knew him at that time was the first time I made that phone call when he was yelling and making outlandish claims, and the other time my wife saw him.
And did you, in fact, when you returned to your house, grab your dogs, a pistol, and your camera?
Yes.
And when you grabbed, well, if you would, when you grabbed your pistol, how did you carry that gun?
I concealed it.
Okay. And did you have a concealed carry license in March of 2014?
Yes.
After grabbing your dogs, your handgun, and a camera, what did you do?
After that, I went up to the campsite.
Okay, and how did you get to the campsite?
I went through my yard, which has the gate that opens to open space. I cut across open space and climbed up to the area.
Okay, and did you see Mr. Boyd when you were walking up to the area where his belongings were?
No.
And why specifically did you go back up to where his belongings were?
We had thefts in the area. Our neighborhood emailed whenever we had people's belongings stolen or cars broken into. So I wanted to check it for any stolen items. I also wanted to see if there were any weapons or any drugs there.
Okay, and if you were concerned about there being stolen items up there, why didn't you simply call the police again?
It was just a matter of documenting it first, because one thing was I knew that he was not there, and I kind of wanted to just confirm that, first off, that these were his items. And if there was any stolen property there, I think that'd be interesting for the police to know, because that would, I would think that would help them put two and two together.
You also mentioned that you wanted to see if there were any weapons there, correct?
Yes.
And why did you want to see if there were any weapons there?
Because he had at one point in my first encounter when I learned about the guy, he had a hostile temperament. It's kind of the last guy I want to have weapons.
And whose safety were you concerned about?
Myself and my wife.
Okay, anyone else?
Not at that time.
Okay. And when you got up to Mr. Boyd's, where his belongings were located in that nest of rocks, what did you do?
I took pictures of what I saw.
Okay, and why did you take pictures?
It was to document what I was seeing there.
Okay.
The items I saw there.
And did you actually touch any of Mr. Boyd's belongings?
No.
Why not?
I wasn't sure if that would have been lawful, so I just left it alone.
Your Honor, I'm about to go into another part. It's a good break.
You're not to discuss the case with other jurors or with any other person. You're not to allow anyone to discuss the case with you or any other person. You must not conduct any research about the case or the scene. You're to avoid any publicity this case may receive, do not read, listen to, or watch any witness conflict. Do not express any opinion about the case or from any form any case opinions or the case is fine as validity or decision. Thank you very much for your attention today. I'll ask that you return tomorrow to your assembly room at 8:20. Thank you. Please stand for the